Welcome back, Ninja community and persons who have just become awesome enough to view my materials for the very first time. Congratulations on becoming awesome enough to view my materials. Now in this video right here, I'm going to be covering basically my new quality statement and disclaimer, as well as sharing a little bit about my heritage. So I will jump through my quality statement and disclaimer real quick, mostly to relieve me of liability. So bear with me real quick as I run through it, and that of course is that the viewer, which is you, understands my quality statement and disclaimer video, additionally agrees that this video, as well as most of my videos, could be treated as is with ballistic protection, which in short means don't have a seal on it, therefore don't guarantee the techniques and or your application of the techniques. And if you're watching this video with the intention of using any of its content to commit a crime, that is also a crime. Actually using any of my content in committing a crime is an additional crime. And the viewer agrees that some of this is my intellectual property that I'm allowing others to view. Okay, so this quality statement and disclaimer is mostly to relieve me of liability, as oftentimes I am demonstrating or instructing on how to do deadly techniques with what's considered deadly weapons. Let's use a bit of common sense there. If you're not allowed to have ballistic gear, then you probably shouldn't be watching this video. If you can have ballistic gear, then there's no problem with you observing this video. If you're not supposed to have deadly weapons, then you shouldn't be watching this video. That would be common sense. Common sense. And I would be relieved of liability as this, it's the topic of deadly weapons. So, some of this I will be covering a little bit of history, as my heritage has a lot to do with local history. So, if you notice here, I'm wearing some paint on my face. I will let you know what this is about. Okay. My heritage is that I am 1/4 Creek Native American, and I am 1/8 Cherokee Native American. I am of tribal descent from both tribes. Now, I will describe what this represents as war paint. War paint had more meaning to it than most people realize. A lot of times what people think of when they think of war paint, they usually picture a Comanche with the few stripes across the cheek. And those were usually put on there for the Comanche by a shaman or a medicine man. But for the Cherokee and the Creek, and this would be a typical Cherokee, well, this side would look like a typical married Cherokee or Creek, and this would look like a typical unmarried Cherokee or Creek, as they were both descended tribes from a larger tribe. So, talking about how it would be historically described. Now, historically, a more accurate depiction is that there would be one horizontal stripe across the eyes made of black war paint, covering the eyes. Red war paint would be worn below and above the eyes. No red war paint would be below the nostrils, right? And on married warriors of the Cherokee and the Creek, there would be what's called the last kiss. The last kiss was called the last kiss because for the Creek and the Cherokee, a kiss was just touching the face at the eyes and going down the cheek. That was what they called the last kiss. So if he died in battle, as she would touch his face with the last kiss. If he had died in battle, then he would literally be wearing the last time that his wife had touched his face, had given him a Cherokee or Creek kiss. And it is attributed to the Cherokee kiss. And of course it would be on both sides. Now, there's a slight difference between the Creek and the Cherokee on the war paint of the black. Now, the Creek always wore the black last kiss every time they left the camp. And red was only worn on war. It was specifically for war. The last kiss was always on the Creek warrior's face every time he left the camp. And another difference between the two is for the Cherokee, other members of the tribe would put marks on his face. Other members of the tribe would usually put marks above the eye, right? If a Cherokee had a bunch of marks on his face, it usually indicated that he was highly beloved amongst his tribe. Or even like just a bunch, or just, it would just be each person would put one mark. They would just touch. That would be like the equivalent of a kiss on the cheek. And this would be like a wife kissing a husband, right? So it held great significance to both the Creek and the Cherokee and was an important part of the culture. An important part of the culture. Now, there is a lot of information that is passed on orally, because not a lot of information could have been put into books within the time frame that they needed to put them all into books in order to honor a treaty that is still valid today, right? Now, the black paint was usually made of ash and or crushed hematite, sometimes of graphite, or graphite equivalent. The red, there is no written recorded historical account of what the red actually was, but it is speculation and word of mouth that the red was actually made of blood. Now, a lot of this is passed on verbally because of not a lot of it could be put into books within the time frame. Now, the treaty that's still valid today, one of those treaties that's still valid today, requires the state of Alabama to provide an Indian education program at every school in the state that has at least 2 students of tribal descent. And to be of tribal descent, the easiest way to be called of tribal descent is to have at least 1/16 Native American blood or more. So, let's run through the math. One person, full half, after half, 1/4, after 1/4, 1/8, after 1/8, it is 1/16. Right? So, that is the grandchild of the grandchild. Okay, or actually, it's more than that. But anyways, if you know the name of the treaty that I'm referencing, feel free to drop a comment below. I'll keep going with this. Okay, as I am a ordained minister and as I am a war veteran who has defended the Constitution and the right of freedom of speech, I know a lot of people out there is afraid of censorship. I'm probably going to make a lot of my videos now unlisted, and I might make them public in the future, but I will likely make a lot of my older videos unlisted because I have no idea what the deal is with the censorship. And as my content is under my terms and is my intellectual property, and of course, as a viewer, everyone who views my material agrees that it is could be treated as is with ballistic protection. it would be quite interesting to see this video here, this video right here, played in full in a courtroom, as it is my constitutional right, my Alabama state constitutional right, that anything, if someone tried to find money or try to deprive anyone of property, even money, it must be brought in front of a court. Must be. And I must be present in order to do that. A lot of times people are afraid of bill collecting agencies, but oftentimes those bill collecting agencies really don't want to deal with someone in courtroom because the burden of proof is on them. And of course, this right here would have to play in full in a court. Because my last 2 years at high school, like something that I think is interesting, my last 2 years at high school, they did not offer an Indian education program, even though it breaks a treaty. It's against federal law. The federal law was that treaty. And as we see it constantly, repetitively, constantly broken. Federal law constantly broken. Even by, I still have yet to find out, when I had visited a state park years ago, of what organization was harvesting lumber at Bucks Pocket State Park. Now, see, Bucks Pocket State Park is a state park as part of a will, as part of a treaty will. When the state agreed to take it on as the custodian of that will, until a person of trust, referencing a federal treaty that's still valid today, would be appointed. And the state was not allowed to harvest any of it for lumber. That was specifically mentioned in that treaty will, in that will. The state of Alabama was its custodian. I had even called the law on the people who was down there harvesting it for lumber, and still could not get that information from the police officer, as that police officer was concerned about personal information. And then I inquired about who I should contact about this, and he was mostly just didn't know anything about what was going on. And I pointed out that it specifically can't be harvested for lumber, as it is under treaty will. It is, the state is the custodian. So, anywho, what do people really care about law if a business could have went into a state park? It was only allowed to be a state park until as the custodian, the state could be a custodian until a person of trust was appointed, referencing another treaty that was signed up in Murfreesboro at one point. If you know the name of the treaty I'm referencing, feel free to comment below. So, that was breaking the law. Now, a private information where a police officer could not tell me what organization that needed to be brought to court, where that police officer would not release that information, and also for some reason had tried to find any reason to get me out of the way on that one. That was not a professional manner to have dealt with the situation, because the people who were harvesting lumber in Bucks Pocket State Park was actually breaking the law. They were breaking federal law. So, I'll talk a little bit more about my culture as I remember it, as most of the information on Native American history has been passed down verbally, as to follow the state law not the state law, but a federal treaty, a federal law, just as important as the Constitution. As the Constitution allows for the president to make treaties, and this was a valid treaty, and is still valid today, the state of Alabama must provide an Indian education program. A lot of information didn't go into history books because about Native American culture. If you notice, just between the Cherokee and the Creek, that was both descended from a larger tribe before that, there's still slight variations in a very significant part of their culture, which was the war paint. A lot of tribes had drastic differences in their culture. This is not the typical Comanche look that you would usually see. Now, the Creek bone armor. I have seen one artifact that was Creek bone armor. It was not in good condition when I seen it. It was basically leather with the bones of dogs or wolves on it. Now, that's a lot different than that small little necklace people see portrayed in the stereotypical Native American look of just like a necklace or just something that covers about here. Now, this was about the equivalent of, like, it would even cover down the legs, down the sides of the legs, and was the equivalent of like wearing a leather gambeson or a hide, right? With a little bit of padding, and was essentially just bones of dogs and or wolves, and it also had a little bit of rawhide on it. So that was the typical look of a Creek warrior, was wearing bone armor, like bones over leather. That was the typical look. That's a lot different than how most people portray Native Americans. And most people don't know this, but around the 1700s, oftentimes, when going into war, a lot of times the Creek did not wear their feathers. Oftentimes. But they would get a feather once they returned after surviving a battle. Now, I'm going to cover a little bit of some of my ninja arts and crafts, right? Now, this, I can't really say that I made this, but I did do some arts and crafts on it. I went to a hardware store and I bought a tomahawk at a hardware store, and I painted it decoratively, and then I wrapped the top here with some leather, like a leather strap, decorated with some rabbit fur, with some glue, and put more on the handle and put some feathers there. And then I put lacquer over it, as lacquer makes leather a lot harder. Okay, there's a technique I would have liked to have covered in this video. If we have time for it, I'll do it. So here we go. Now, I'm not particularly well studied in the Native American martial arts. That's what is it called? If you know the name, drop a comment below. But I have seen the Native American War Dance, like I've seen the Cherokee War Dance. And the Cherokee War Dance looks a lot to me, as me being a real shinobi, looks a lot like a weapons kata without their weapon of choice. Now, the Cherokee and the Creek's weapons of choice for both tribes was both the tomahawk and the atlatl. So I'll demonstrate my interpretation of one of the movements within the Cherokee War Dance that seems to make sense to me as a weapons technique if someone was to implement a tomahawk. Now, without the weapon, it looks like this right here, where they're just going like this, and then back this way and down. Now, some people have said that the reason they do that is because it's supposed to make the bells they're wearing jingle more. I don't think that's true. If you agree with me, definitely hit like hard like a ninja. But if you introduce their weapon of choice, it would basically be a strike that might have gotten blocked and by an opponent who was stronger than me and tried to disarm me. If my opponent had tried to disarm me, right, by turning my arm back this way, I could step in, right, and at the same time I could put my arm over here to stabilize the weapon, right, as I could push with my elbow, right, and then I could strike lower against the leg. So that would be my interpretation of what that movement in the Cherokee War Dance is actually for, is by introducing the weapon of choice, such as the tomahawk. So I'll cover a little bit more in this video here, and we'll get into, I guess I'll talk a little bit about, now there's another indigenous system out there called Capoeira. I've met martial artists in passing of both those different martial arts styles, but neither one of them was instructor levels. And just using my own, I guess I'm brilliant or something, but just using my own interpretation of, like, with Capoeira, watching Capoeira and knowing what their weapon of choice was, some of the movements they do make more sense, as their weapon of choice was the torch. They practiced fire breathing. So when they duck upside down, it was usually to dodge someone breathing fire at you. So I'd imagine that as a system, it would make more sense if you introduced their weapon, right? As if someone's breathing fire at you, you might want to duck occasionally. Okay, so there's this censorship thing out there, and a lot of people are getting supposed creators out there are getting worried. Why? Well, I'm probably going to make several of my videos unlisted and make this video most definitely public. So, if you've watched the video so far, feel free to hit like hard like a ninja, subscribe to my channel to be alerted for when I do videos on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe, and share. Check out my other videos. And I'm on Instagram. It's like part of my name, and it's also like Mel-El, like M-E-L-E-O. So be ninja and find me there. So you can share my video with people who are ninja, but not with people who ought to be ninja, because they might accidentally learn something. So until next time, my friends, stay ninja.